Welcome to the Education Marketing Leader podcast with Chris Raposo. If you're looking to dive into the latest industry insights, draw inspiration from education success stories, or just want to sharpen your marketing skills, you're in the right place. Here, we bring you a diverse range of voices from experts and leaders in the field, offering you a unique blend of professional development and practical strategies. Whether you want to understand your audience better, stay updated with the latest tech trends in marketing, or expand your professional network, we've got you covered. So while you're driving on your morning commute or winding down after a busy day, let's explore the dynamic world of education marketing together.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Education Marketing Leader with Chris Raposo. Today, my guest is joining me from the far northeast. Her name is Suzan Brinker, and she is the co-founder and CEO of VIV Higher Education and the author of Pass Fail. Suzan, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited for this conversation.
Very good. So Suzan is a fellow German. We were just reminiscing about our time living in Germany, coming to the United States and living the American dream. And both of us are podcast hosts, and I think that is part of that American dream in 2025. So it's great to have you. Today's topic is on the future of higher ed marketing and leadership, and we'll talk about insights from Suzan's book, Pass Fail. So Suzan, your book is super insightful. I love the introduction, great storytelling that keeps the visitor, the reader engaged and wants to go further into the details shared. So during the book, you highlight the urgent need for strategic leadership in higher education. Let's talk about the beginnings. What inspired you to write this book, and why now? Why is now the critical moment for this conversation?
Yeah, I think multiple things inspired me to write it. The first one is I think we have a really disappointing absence of case studies in higher education leadership. Applied case studies. There might be some about the presidency that you can find, but really what about all the different divisions that a president needs to rely on to facilitate the institutional strategy, whether that strategy is centered on growth or something else that it wants to become known for, or if it wants to become more diverse, whatever the objective is, right? You need enrollment, you need marketing, you need advancement, you need finance, you need strategic planning. And those case studies simply don't exist. And I wanted to make sure that there is a resource that somebody who's really interested in leading big in higher education, who wants to spend their career making a really big impact in that space, a resource for them. And the other reason that I wrote it is I think when you're in one of those divisions, whether it's marketing or enrollment or any of the others that I just mentioned, it's really easy to get disconnected from the mission. And you tend to, if you're not always in front of students, and maybe you're on a small campus and you go to the cafeteria and you see the students, or you hire them as interns, but if you're not teaching or interfacing with them in the student affairs world, it's really easy to feel out of touch with the students and with the mission. I mean, I've heard people in some institutions say they feel like they're working in the sausage factory because what they're charged with is bringing the enrollments in or bringing the inquiries in, and it really is not very meaningful to them. And I wanted to make a very explicit connection between the mission and the functions that many of us work in, and make sure that mission piece is front and center. And so that's why I chose to tell a really personal story about how I myself started out, as an international student at a small liberal arts college that changed my life so profoundly. And that was shaped by kind of tragedy and loss, and then set me on a different path to stay in the United States and ultimately dedicate my career to higher education. I wanted to tell that personal story because I think it does a good job of illuminating why higher ed campuses are so much more than places where we do knowledge transfer or where we prepare for our careers or meet friends and spouses, whatever. It's so much deeper than that. And I think that's why I wrote it the way I did.
Yes, you just mentioned loss, and it's you're hinting towards your former roommate Cassandra in the book, and you also mentioned her father, Kurt, and what an influence he had on you staying in the United States. Tell me a little bit about that interaction.
Yeah, sure. Cassandra died in a car accident that I was also in the early summer of 2007, May. Obviously, that was a devastating experience. And interestingly, when that happened, I really did not want to leave the campus. I was actually supposed to only be there for a year. I was an exchange student and teaching German and taking a full course load. But there was something about that college community, even during the summer, where it wasn't really, a robust community. It was kind of stripped down to its basics, that gave me a lot of comfort. And I wanted to kind of stay there a little bit longer and process what had happened. And her father, Kurt, was just really kind and wanted to understand, how I was going to move on from this terrible experience. And I, at some point, mentioned to him that I felt like this college was where I wanted to ideally stay, but it wasn't realistic. I just kind of said it like in an offhand way. I just said, here, there's community, there's meaning, people care. And he was like, well, if you feel that way, then you should find a way to stay, which was easier said than done for me. So the book talks about how I eventually figured out how to stay, but it was really a big lift, and it felt incredibly scary, and like I was taking a lot of risk financially, and we were really shocked in Germany, my family and friends, that I wanted to stay in a place where something so terrible had happened. And so, yeah, it's a big story. Kurt is still in my life. He has done incredible things on that campus, started a center, and is on the board of trustees now. And so yeah, that started it all. I think from then on, I knew I was most at home on a college campus, and I got my master's and my PhD. And then when it was done, I was like, I still need to stay in higher education. So that's where I still am.
And that is just that story drives home the importance of community, a sense of meaning and belonging for those students that are there, to retain them or to offer that experience for the potential students. And that is especially relevant for the upcoming or already happening demographic enrollment cliff, which is
Right.
one of the biggest challenges institutions face, especially in the Northeast and the Midwest. Let's talk about some of the most effective strategies colleges and universities can implement to remain competitive and sustainable.
Yeah. One of them is what I call integrated growth planning. And that means that instead of treating each division as a silo where academic affairs is charged with deciding what new programs are going to launch, and marketing is charged with driving inquiries, and enrollment is charged with setting those goals and bringing the students in for applicants and deposits, and advancement is charged with fundraising and so on. Breaking down those silos and doing integrated growth planning in a way that puts them all into conversation with each other. Because if you're going to be charging marketing with driving inquiries that feed up into certain enrollment goals, I think it would be wise to understand, what does the capacity look like in the programs that we're filling? Do we need to add capacity? What kind of market research do we need to do? What's the ROI? Even if we're tripling enrollments, is that ultimately is the revenue not necessarily going to triple because we are incurring a bunch of costs, right? So those conversations, I think, they tend to happen, but they don't tend to happen in a disciplined enough way. They stay at sort of a high level, strategic, theoretical level. And very rarely have I seen a college campus really be disciplined in translating the strategy to consistent action. And so that's what integrated growth planning is about. If you're charged with growth, you need to break down those silos and figure out how to manage that change week over week.
Yeah, and you dedicated a chapter 4, to breaking down the silos in your book. Here it is, Pass Fail, the urgent need for strategic leadership in higher education. And one, right at the beginning of creating a shared accountability, you mentioned that a siloed mentality on campuses not only reduces efficiency, but at its worst contributes to reduced morale and an isolated culture. And that's, we've seen a lot of churn on the institutional side with the staff, maybe even faculty. And it's so important to have that happy staff that's going to put in the extra effort, because we all know that institutional employees, they don't get paid as well as the ones on the private sector.
Right.
That's why you see so many people moving either in consultancies, being consultants, or starting their own company, or agencies like VIV Higher Education, because there's just a little bit more room to grow your compensation that public university may not be able to offer. But I don't know if you know Eddie Francis. He's talking about, he's one of the Enrollify podcast hosts, and he talks about employer branding and the importance of that. Now, when it comes to branding in higher education, it's always, it's often an afterthought, rather than a strategic priority. How do you think institutions should rethink their brand and attract and retain staff and students in today's landscape?
Yeah, you bring up so many good points. So first of all, yes to all of that. When it comes to brand, yeah, I mean, brand is really culture, right? In an ideal world, they're one and the same. And I think too many institutions are spending a lot of money on a brand redesign or refresh, where really they're concerning themselves mostly with sort of the messaging and maybe the visuals and the, how do we drive inquiries better? And maybe that's done in a competitor context where we're like, how can we stand out from the competition? How can we really connect emotionally with students? That doesn't always happen, but if it does, that's good, right? But it doesn't necessarily, what you're saying is true, that institutions don't consider how to then activate the brand, where all of a sudden everyone in the admissions office, everyone in the major gifts office, everyone on campus is saying the same things. Because that's the hard work, right? You can't pay a consultant or an agency to do that for you. You have to sort of evangelize your campus. Maybe that's not the right word, but sort of, that it takes a while. But I think inextricably institutions have to consider brand from both a differentiation standpoint. So why should students consider us over our top 5 to 7 competitors? And what market research do we need to do, and what perception studies do we need to do to ensure that? How can we connect with them emotionally and psychographically? But beyond that, just how can we be consistent? How can we motivate the people? So the brand has to be true for that to be achieved. The brand that you redesign has to feel authentic and true to people who've been on that campus for a really long time. And I think that's where morale issues occur, when all of a sudden there's a brand that doesn't connect with people who are already on the campus. The other time, since we're talking about silos as well, where morale issues occur is when there's so much inefficiency across these different units, where the left hand doesn't know what the right hand is even working on, and you figure out this thing that you've been doing. None of us are going into higher ed because we want to get rich, right? So we're all there because theoretically we believe in the mission. All of a sudden you figure out that person over in advancement has been working on a presidential podcast, and your team has been working on a presidential podcast, and nobody ever discovered that you should probably join forces. And at that point, there is now bad blood somehow, right? Because we're now threatened by each other. This kind of stuff happens all the time on college campuses. And I would really love to see institutions implement that leadership element, not necessarily at the cabinet level, but somebody who's like a cross-functional leader who is looking for those silos, looking for those inefficiencies, and actively develops benchmarks and KPI frameworks to manage against them.
Hey everyone, thanks so much for tuning into the show today. I hope you enjoyed so far. Have you ever thought about starting your own podcast, but we're just overwhelmed by the sheer amount of work that goes into it? I get it. After producing over 100 episodes for the Education Marketing Leader, there's a lot of time that goes into this, time that most of us simply don't have. And that's where the Education Marketing Leader podcast production service comes into play. Me and my team will take care of the heavy lifting, from scripting, strategy, editing, to promoting. All you have to do is show up, record your episode, share your expertise, connect with your audience, and build your personal brand. So if you've been sitting on a podcast idea, today is the time to act. Reach out to me via DM on LinkedIn and we'll get you started. And now, back to the episode. Yeah, you brought up a good point here in the book, promoting cross-functional collaboration. I think that's one way to help break down those silos. We want to dig a little bit deeper into that. But you talked about branding here also. You said the importance of consistency, because consistency breeds familiarity, which then breeds trust, right?
Yeah, trust is what you're after. Yeah.
That's right. Because if you have a message, but it constantly changes every other week, people don't know what you stand for, what you're all about, and then they're going to be confused, and then they'll look for somebody who can give them that sense of of peace and comfort, because we're looking for comfort as well. Especially those younger Gen Zers that are leaving home, that are looking for something, they may be scared because they've never been outside of their home, as well as the parents. I'm a parent, and I'm thinking about my kid going to college somewhere far away. That's a stressful situation for me as well, because I want to make sure that they're safe. And does that institution provide that? But yeah, let's go into cross-functional collaboration a little bit. What can marketers do to bridge these gaps of silos and play a bigger role in institutional strategy to help bring everybody together, so we don't have a situation where two departments work on a presidential podcast?
I think the first thing that we as institutions have to do is remove the red tape, which is, I know, a loaded statement, but in particular, I mean, in many institutions, you have people who are truly told to stay in their lanes, right? You might, if you are lucky enough to work in a big marketing department, for example, like I used to be at Penn State World Campus, where we had 125 people just on the online marketing and admissions team. You have a very specific job, and the expectation is that you stay in your lane. So this wasn't necessarily applicable to me in this intense of a way, but we had copy editors who weren't allowed to copyright. We had designers who weren't allowed to art direct. We had strategists who weren't allowed to write. We had strategists who weren't allowed to research, right? That was not their lane.
Wow.
First of all, the bloat that creates is bad, but also you are directly disincentivizing collaboration, cross-functional collaboration, and that breaking down of silos that's so desperately needed, because people don't want to step on each other's toes. So what it takes is somebody who's either intensely self-motivated, who is willing to be sort of hated by a lot of people to beat the drum of change, or someone who is directly appointed by a VP or the president themselves to change that. And I think if you have a charge from the top of the organization, and then you equip yourself with the tools that you need to be effective in that, that's sort of the only way to change that mindset of silos and stepping on toes. And there are examples for institutions that have put someone in charge like that, and then very concretely, and that's where it gets maybe a little boring to some, but what does that person then need to do, right, in order to be effective over the course of 1 or 2 years? Well, they need a project management system. They need to keep track of, or maybe they need a project manager or two to work with them. They need like weekly meetings. They need like very clear KPI frameworks. We love the stoplight approach, where it's green, yellow, or red. Is this going well? Is it not going well? Why not? What can we do to change it? I could talk about that all day, but I'll stop there. So I think I think there's some real examples. People listening will immediately think, oh yeah, that's how it works here, and will resonate with this.
But that is rough. Like having a department of 125 people and the copy editor can't write copy. I mean,
Chris, can I just give one more example, because it's so crazy? We had a copy team that was so overloaded, they couldn't keep up with the needs. So the strategy team said, what if we wrote some of this copy? And they said, this is an insult to us, to our professional skills, that you would think as strategists you can write copy. Now, of course, we're in the age of AI. This was like 8 years ago, so things are changing anyway. But that kind of mindset, right? How do you overcome that?
Yeah, just think about that person from the strategy office, how taken aback they are, because all they're trying to do is help somebody, and then they get
We're trying to solve the problem. Yeah.
That's right. And then somebody that's like, hey, don't step on my turf. Don't stay into my lane. And when I hear these stories, I'm thinking about a stagnancy. I would be so bored if I would be doing the same thing over
Right.
and
And
over.
so I think when you talk about people not getting paid and leaving, it's not just about pay.
Yeah.
It's about creative constraints as well, and the ability to meet your full potential, because you have those really strong barriers put in place for you.
That is eye-opening what you just said. So there's this saying, jack of all trades, master of none. But I think the saying goes further. I think it's jack of all trades, master of none. Often is better than a master of some, or something like that. I have to look
Oh,
into
really?
that.
I hadn't heard that. Yeah,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
the way, if we play it out, I mean,
Yes.
you don't want to be I mean, we need specialists and generalists, but we also need to be creative in how we deploy them
That's
toward a
right.
strategic goal instead of
Yeah.
just in their lane of, the professional lane that they've been put in at the beginning of their employment.
That's right, and I think that's where professional growth comes in, right? If you explore and have that entrepreneurial mindset in academia,
Right.
um, just talking about that because you discussed the importance of innovation and the entrepreneurial mindset in academia. Can you share an example or two of an institution that successfully embraced this approach?
Yeah, sure. Entrepreneurial mindset to me is the key that we're going to need that in the next 5 to 10 years in higher ed, and institutions that are able to adapt it at scale are the ones that are going to thrive. And what that concretely means is we need to figure out how to pick up the pace, right? We need to break down those silos. We need to do more with less. We need to be able to make decisions with imperfect data as well, which is a huge issue in academia. We need to get better at taking risks. We need to learn what to say no to, what to stop doing. All of those sort of principles of entrepreneurial leadership or entrepreneurial mindset. Yeah, and there are institutions that have done that. I like Northeastern University as an example because I'm familiar with them from having worked there myself. And they're not always perfect at this, but they have started at this point 10 plus new campuses. And there's, think about the risk that it is in acquiring institutions, acquiring space in new geolocations, trying to build the brand awareness there. In some cases, they even have campuses in different countries, Canada and the UK for sure. And just so they have managed to become much more selective and climb the rankings so aggressively while also growing at the same time. I mean, think about how genius that is. So, what did they do to enable that level of entrepreneurial thinking? And
Yeah.
then on the small institution side, I love to talk about Elon University as well, which is a liberal arts college in North Carolina that, under the leadership of Leo Lambert, tripled its undergraduate enrollments over a 20-year time span by just drastically rethinking who they are. Well, they actually doubled down on who they'd always been, but they rethought what no longer serves them given the future of what students want, and they just totally leaned into the quality of their teaching, which is ultimately what a small liberal arts college often has going for itself, and became really, really disciplined about executing on that over many years. They did 2 consecutive 10-year strategic plans, so they weren't afraid to look out. Leo says they looked out and around the corner, because it takes hard things. It takes 10 years to do hard things in higher education. When many institutions have these 3 to 5 year strategic plans that don't really take you from concept to implementation, especially if you're trying to do hard things like build new residence halls and really change your student profile or really climb the rankings and things like that.
Yeah, it reminds me of what Jill Whitaker yesterday said in our Education Marketing Leader book club where we were together, and she talked about that, her words, crotchety old donor who doesn't like change, who wants to remain the way it was 20, 30 years ago. If you have somebody like that in the ranks on the board, pushing
Right.
back like that, you're going to have a hard time changing the way you do things, reaping the benefits of, like you just mentioned, from Elon University, where they triple undergraduate enrollment within a 20-year time frame. And it's the other thing you have to remember: it's 20 years. This is crazy long. Having a strategic mindset like that and sticking with it over the long term is very difficult, and you have to have leaders that are visionaries to execute that and to stick with it, right?
I agree completely. And Northeastern has been at this since 2006, so
Mhm.
basically 20 years. Elon, it took 20 years.
Yeah.
Another really awesome case study that I just interviewed Nathan Ament from Knox College about for my podcast. So that this is not in my book. Northeastern and Elon are, but Knox College is not. Um, is about how they also tripled their international enrollment. And he talks about, how important it is to play the long game on that because you can't just wave a magic wand. I mean, every single board wants that, especially for institutions that are struggling for enrollments. But you have to build a campus where the international student experience shines,
Hmm.
and you need to build that before you can really scale. And how do you do that, right? So you have to make some investments, and I think that's what institutions struggle with. Like they want to make the tiniest bit of an investment, and then if it doesn't work out, then that wasn't there are all these reasons why that didn't work out. We shouldn't do that again.
Yeah.
The institutions who think that way are going to really pay for it, because now we have 15% fewer people in the market and we have drastically higher competition. So we need to be willing to make some bets. Northeastern didn't know what they were getting into when they started campuses. They made an informed risk, took an informed risk, and now they're reaping the benefits.
So with Knox College, did you already publish that episode?
It's out, I think, as of this week. Yeah, it's the week of February
Okay,
10th
okay.
right now.
Make
Yeah,
sure
it
we
came
do.
out this week.
Where I'm super interested in that because especially with the administration change and the a possible crackdown in immigration, where are they getting these international students from primarily? Do you remember?
I think it's all over the place, but of course,
Okay.
the top countries are still China, Korea, Turkey is one, Singapore. There's some African
Mm,
countries, Middle East, right? So the
mhm.
kind of everyone wants students from there.
Yeah.
But many institutions also that are in Elon's, sorry, not Elon's, Knox's competitor or peer set have like less than 2% international students. So what did Knox do differently to get
Mhm.
them? And I think they did some things that, like having agents on ground that are maybe sometimes frowned upon, but
Yeah.
just because it didn't work for many schools doesn't mean it can't work. You just have to do it better. So there are
Wow.
just, again, that risk taking and that trying things a little bit differently and staying with it, sticking with it is so, so important.
Yeah, and they're in Illinois, Galesburg, Illinois, about
Yeah.
two
Yeah,
hours
they're
and 40.
not, they're not in Boston where I am,
Yeah.
where like international students are dying to live, or New York or California. They're literally in the middle of the Midwest.
Yeah. So do they have, let's say, are they helping people with their visas, with their immigration? Do they have people on staff at the enrollment or admissions office, or how do you make it a smooth process?
Yeah, so Nathan talks about the infrastructure that they had to
Hmm.
build to be able to facilitate that positive student experience,
Mm.
for sure. So that is part of that, but also just the intercultural skills that need to
Mm.
exist on campus, making sure that students feel at home there and that they persist, right? And word of mouth is a big issue as well. If people have negative experiences, word will
Yeah.
spread. So I think they really have a robust set of strategies in place that allow them to grow so aggressively for sure.
Yeah, that word of mouth is especially important for cultures that are collectively positioned, right? Where family and friends is very important,
Absolutely.
not individualistic. So keep that in mind and knowing
Hmm.
that that word will spread and they'll bring their friends to grow that. And that is, international students is one thing to help balance the scale with the enrollment cliff.
Yeah, international or Hispanic students are top of mind,
Yeah.
because they're the population nationally that's still growing, and then state by state it kind of varies. But yeah, I mean, what I've heard sitting in board meetings and in cabinet conversations is sort of this top level question. Like, we just have to recruit more Hispanic students or international students, and it's not a strategic conversation. At the end of the day, you might have a harder time recruiting Hispanic and international students to your campus because your campus is not the right fit for them. You might be better off really doubling down on your own backyard and finding the students that have always come to you, in just smarter of a way. But in an ideal world, also, you have a matrix of strategies that combines all of those approaches and that has somebody in charge of it that is able to facilitate disciplined implementation over a long period of time.
Part five of your book is entitled Culture. You highlighted the role of institutional culture in driving or hindering progress. What steps do you suggest leaders take to create culture that supports innovation and adaptability?
Yeah, I mean, you can't talk about strategy without talking about culture, just like you can't talk about brand without talking about culture. So I
Mm,
wanted to make sure there's a robust section. And it goes down to some basic human behaviors that are festering in organizations like higher education that are inherently not top down because of how we're structured. The governance is split across the president, the cabinet, the board, and the faculty senate. But we are still very, very archaic and hierarchical. And I think hierarchy is something that's natural in people's mind. You could have a leader that invites people to think along them and reassures them. It's not going to take away the hierarchy, but there are things that you can do to just motivate people to work together better. And so one of the principles that I highlight in my book, it's not specific to higher education, but radical candor, based on a book and podcast by Kim Scott, which really combines basically warmth with directness. So you show that you care personally, but you challenge directly when things are out of alignment. And then this isn't in the book because I discovered this resource after I wrote it, but the book American Icon, which is about Alan Mulally at Ford, turning around that organization at the height of the Great Recession, is incredible. And our leadership team at VIV actually has implemented what he calls business plan review, which are weekly meetings where you really manage against a set of KPIs with that stoplight matrix I mentioned earlier with the red, yellow, and green. And you encourage people kind of surfacing their problems and saying, here's what's not going well, instead of making leadership meetings like a PR show, right? Where you're like, I'm doing all of these things. My team is great. Applause. Maybe we need to hire more people because they're so great. Instead, you're saying like, hey, we're really struggling with this and this. And instead of being torn down in front of everyone, Alan Mulally would have said, round of applause for you because you just surfaced something that's really important. Who can help? And I really think that even just the radical candor and that more disciplined approach to KPIs and managing them positively would be a game changer for most institutions. But the reason that I wrote the book about leadership is because none of that happens if leadership doesn't do it well and doesn't model it and put people in charge who can do that as well. But I have some case studies in that chapter, or that section rather, about things that have gone wrong when I was in institutions, even, things that I did that weren't great, things that others did that I think could have been done better without calling anyone out. So there's some examples in the book as well.
Well, we'll highly recommend reading the book. Everybody who's listening, I'm sure, is going to get a copy of the book. I also love that you pull information from outside of higher education with Radical Candor and American Icon. Now, I'm really interested in that American Icon book, and I'm probably
good.
I'm going to have to get a copy.
Spread the word.
I will spread the word.
My friend who works in healthcare administration, we had dinner one night and she was like, you need to read this book. I'm changing everything about how I lead. And we implemented it. Our leadership team is obsessed with it. And it's changed so much for us. So I'm hoping, because we do some strategic leadership retreats through VIV with cabinets and things like that. I'm hoping to bring sort of like that as a custom method to more institutions as well, because I think it's going to make all the difference.
All right. So, but first of all, we want to read pass fail, everybody. So
that's right. We shouldn't distract ourselves.
Exactly. So if a higher ed leader or a marketer takes away one key lesson from your book, what should it be? The
key lesson, I think, is also you can lead where you are at. So some people might think that you shouldn't step on their toes. Let them think that, but don't let them stop you. You can lead from any position. And I think you can bring, curiosity and strategic questions to every conversation. I think that's just what's going to set you apart, is that positive, holistic, curious mindset to understand, why are we doing it this way? Have we always done it? Okay, is that a reason to always continue to do it this way? And bringing those strategic questions is going to set you apart. And people are going to notice that you're asking really good questions. And of course, you have to figure out how to manage your own emotions and make sure that you're positive and warm and not accusing, because that's not going to work well with people. People are going to notice that. And when you get frustrated, not to gossip. That's a big part of my culture section. I have a section on gossip and how higher ed does a lot of that. Right? It's always more comfortable, right, to go and talk behind someone's back than to talk to their face. But be someone who has integrity in whatever position that you're in, and always try to connect the dots between those critical functions of strategy, brand, enrollment, and advancement. Those are the areas of the institution that are charged directly with growth. Of course, student affairs is critical too, because they have to manage a good student experience and student success outcomes. Of course, finance, they're all important. but understand how they're connected. Because if you can figure out how to align them more, you're not only going to have a great career, you're going to have a lot of fun, you're going to have a big impact.
I loved that part about the gossip and the passive aggressiveness. Because we're both from Germany, so we both have a different cultural upbringing of directness. And then you touched on the American workplace, and I was like, wow, I feel seen, I feel seen. But there was a thing about gossip that made you change your mind initially, right? Because weren't you caught in gossiping or something like that in the book?
I tell an embarrassing story about a meeting. People can read that, about where somebody was kind of back channeling me and then shared their screen. It was bad, but we learned from it. It happens to all of us, right? We're all human, but I think these kinds of lessons show us like that didn't really move us forward, and it doesn't feel values aligned. But yeah, the Germany thing is huge, because in Germany, I would say that I'm a pretty mellow person in Germany, and in America, everybody thinks I'm so blunt. So those are just completely relevant, right? In how people behave in organizations as well.
Yeah, I sometimes tell my wife I'm sorry the German came out when I say something, it's direct and straightforward. But
My husband has many memes that he sends me. Yeah.
yes, but yeah, you just sharing that story of that situation with the screen share, I was like, wow, did you even put that in the book? Right, shows authenticity and
Oh, thank you.
you're leading by example. So I really enjoyed that. But tell us a little bit about VIV Higher Education and how people can connect with you after this episode.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I'm guilty of what you said people are doing, which is leave the in-house world to start their own companies or go into consulting. I did that in 2019. Initially, I thought, oh, it wouldn't be nice to have more time with my kids. Of course, that didn't happen. I work harder than I ever have before, but it's so fun because it removes the constraints of the red tape, and we get to work with institutions in a really impactful way. So we specialize. We have a team of 10. We work with institutions all across the country, some international. We specialize in enrollment, marketing, and strategy. We also do market research. We do some advancement and fundraising services, mission and leadership retreats. It's really a lot of fun. We have a program called VIV Academy, where people who are working in higher ed right now can join an 8-week cohort to learn sort of VIV's way of working, and then potentially join us afterwards as a team member or a freelancer. So that's also fun. You can check that out on our website, which is vivhied.com. You can Google VIV Higher Education and find it. And if you need help at your institution, it's always worth a conversation with us.
Absolutely. I'll be sure to tag you and VIV Higher Education in the recap and the show notes so people can find you easily. Suzan, it was a pleasure talking to you today. Thank you so much for sharing your insights in the book and being on the podcast. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. This was so much fun, Chris. Thank you again.
You bet. All right. Thank you so much. Take care. And that's a wrap for this episode, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in to Education Marketing Leader Podcast this week. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to share it with your friends and your network. And if you ever thought about starting your own podcast, now that you listen to one and you got inspired, reach out to me via DM. We'd love to help you launch your own. We'll take care of everything for you, the scripting, the strategy, the editing, the distribution. All you have to do is show up, connect with your audience, and build your personal brand. So if you're ready for it, let's chat. And for everybody else, we'll see you next time at the Education Marketing Leader Podcast. Take care, friends.